For most of us, a backyard garden feels like pure freedom. Tomatoes on the vine, peaches ripening in the sun, maybe even a berry patch for summer pies. But what if I told you that some fruits, even the ones your grandparents once enjoyed, are now illegal to grow in America? Across the country, dozens of fruits have been banned or heavily restricted, not because they're exotic or hard to find, but because they carry pests, spread deadly plant diseases, or in some cases, they're just plain dangerous to eat. From currants that nearly wiped out entire forests, to tropical delicacies outlawed by the USDA, to fruits so toxic they've been compared to poison, these are the hidden stories behind the produce we were never meant to plant. In this video, we'll uncover 15 fruits that you can't grow in American gardens, each one with a surprising story of history, danger, and nostalgia. Some are beloved before the ban, others were feared from the start, but all of them remind us that even something as simple as fruit can change the course of American life. Right-ero, and we begin with one of the most surprising bans of all, a tiny berry that vanished from gardens for over 100 years. Once a favorite for jams, jellies, and pies, black currants were suddenly ripped from American gardens, not because of taste, but because they threatened to destroy an entire industry. In the early 1900s, black currants were a common sight in American backyards. Their tart, dark berries were treasured for baking, preserves, and even homemade wine. But in 1911, the federal government banned them nationwide. Why? Scientists discovered that black currants carried a fungus called white pine blister rust, a disease deadly to pine trees, especially the white pines that fueled America's lumber industry. Protecting the forest became more important than preserving a fruit. For generations, currants have been part of American kitchens, especially in immigrant communities that brought the tradition from Europe. The sudden ban forced families to abandon recipes and traditions. Even processed foods that once relied on currant flavoring disappeared. Entire cookbooks had to be rewritten without one of their favorite ingredients. The shocking part is just how long the ban lasted. For nearly 100 years, growing black currants was either strictly illegal or heavily restricted. Only in the early 2000s did some states begin to lift the ban, allowing small farms to reintroduce them. Today, currants are making a quiet comeback, but for most Americans, the fruit their grandparents once knew remains a forgotten flavor of the past. And black currants weren't the only berry to vanish from American gardens. Their close cousin, the gooseberry, faced the very same fate. They may look harmless, small, round, and tart, but gooseberries were once treated like public enemy number one in American gardens. Like black currants, gooseberries were popular in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They were baked into pies, stewed with sugar, or eaten fresh right off the bush. But in 1911, the federal government banned them for the same reason as currants. They carried the dreaded white pine blister rust. This fungus could devastate America's pine forests, which were crucial not just for lumber, but for paper, construction, and even the nation's growing railroads. To protect the industry, gooseberries were outlawed across much of the country. Gooseberries weren't just food, they were tradition. Immigrant families, especially those from Europe, saw them as a taste of home. Old recipes called for gooseberry jams and chutneys, and rural families relied on the hardy shrubs to provide fruit in lean times. Their loss was felt not just in gardens, but in kitchens where the tart little berries have been a beloved summer staple. The shocking truth is that the ban lingered for decades, and even after federal restrictions were eased, many states kept their own laws in place. In fact, gooseberries are still technically illegal to grow in some parts of the U.S. today. What was once a backyard favorite became a forbidden fruit, and for many Americans, it quietly vanished from memory. But not every banned fruit was dangerous to forests. Some were banned because they created a different kind of problem, one that made life miserable for people, not trees. They shaded summer picnics, stained children's hands, and sweetened pies. But in some parts of America, mulberry trees became so unwelcome that planting them was made illegal. Mulberries were once a familiar sight across American backyards. Their berries, which ripened to a deep purple, were eaten fresh, baked into cobblers, or simply shaken from branches onto a blanket for easy picking. But in the mid-20th century, mulberries gained a bad reputation. Their heavy pollen was found to be a major trigger for seasonal allergies and asthma, especially in dry climates like the Southwest. Some cities, including El Paso, Las Vegas, and parts of Arizona, responded by banning the planting of new mulberry trees altogether. For older generations, mulberries weren't just fruit, they were childhood memories. The trees grew fast, provided deep shade, and gave kids a free snack in the summertime. In small towns, mulberries were part of the landscape, messy, sweet, and everywhere. That made the bands feel personal to families who had grown up with them. The shocking twist is that many bands are still in place today. In cities like Tucson, planting a mulberry tree can actually get you fined. What was once a symbol of abundance and simple pleasures became a public nuisance. For those who remember eating mulberries right off the branch, the idea that they're now forbidden feels like losing a piece of the past to modern health concerns. And mulberries weren't alone. Another ancient tree, one that gave us one of the world's oldest fruits, also found itself on the banned list in parts of America. They were symbols of peace, prosperity, and timeless tradition. Yet in parts of America, olive trees were blacklisted for something as simple as their pollen. Olive trees have been cultivated for thousands of years, treasured across the Mediterranean for their fruit and oil. When immigrants brought them to the United States, they seemed like a perfect fit for California's warm climate. And for a while, they were. California even built an olive industry around them. But ornamental olive trees, the kind that didn't always produce edible fruit, became popular in landscaping, especially in the Southwest during the mid-1900s. That's when the trouble started. These ornamental olives were prized because they looked stately and lived for centuries, requiring little water. They lined driveways, shaded patios, and lent a sense of European charm to suburban neighborhoods. But their beauty came at a cost. Olive pollen turned out to be a nightmare for people with allergies. Cities like Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Tucson began passing ordinances banning the planting of new olive trees in the late 20th century. The emotional twist is that for many families of Mediterranean heritage, olive trees weren't just decoration. They were a link to their roots. Yet today, in some American cities, planting one in your yard could bring fines, penalties, or even forced removal. What was once a tree of peace became, ironically, a tree of conflict in American gardens. And while olive trees were banned for their pollen, another tropical fruit faced restrictions for an entirely different reason: the threat of dangerous pests. They called it the Queen of Fruits, so rare and so sweet that even Queen Victoria once offered a reward to anyone who could bring her one. But in America, Mangosteen was treated more like a smuggler's prize than a delicacy. Native to Southeast Asia, the mangosteen was beloved for its rich, sweet tart flavor. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Western travelers returning from Asia raved about this mysterious purple fruit, sparking a kind of exotic fascination back home. But despite its popularity overseas, the U.S. government put strict bans on importing fresh mangosteens. The reason wasn't about taste, it was about bugs. Mangosteens often carried the Asian fruit fly, a pest capable of devastating American orchards and crops. So for decades, mangosteen was virtually impossible to find legally in the United States. Some dedicated fruit lovers even resorted to smuggling it in, treating it like contraband. It wasn't until the early 2000s, after strict irradiation treatments were developed, that mangosteens could finally be sold in American markets, and even then, only sparingly. For older generations, mangosteen became almost mythical, a fruit you could read about but never taste. Immigrant families who grew up with it back home often longed for the flavor, only to find it forbidden on American soil. What should have been a taste of home became instead a reminder of distance, regulation, and longing. And while the mangosteen was kept out for fear of fruit flies, another tropical fruit was banned for a more curious reason: its spiky skin and overwhelming odor. It's called the king of fruits in Southeast Asia, but in America, it's better known as the fruit that smells so bad it's been banned from airplanes, hotels, and even city buses. Durian is native to Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, where it's prized for its custard-like flesh and complex flavor. For centuries, it's been a centerpiece of festivals, feasts, and family gatherings in Asia. But when Americans first encountered the spiky fruit, the reaction was mixed, to say the least. The odor, often described as a mix of rotting onions, gym socks, and gasoline, proved overwhelming to many. In the United States, durian's problem wasn't just its smell. Because the fruit is large, spiky, and perishable, importing it came with health and safety concerns. Some states restricted its sale, while hotels and airlines flat out banned it from their properties. For decades, durian was available only in specialty Asian markets, often frozen, and always under strict regulations. To immigrants who grew up with durian, America's distaste for it was painful, a reminder that what was considered a delicacy back home could be treated like garbage in their new country. And yet, a new generation of adventurous foodies has begun embracing durian, daring one another to try it, and posting their reactions online. What was once forbidden has now become a viral trend, turning an illegal fruit into an unlikely internet star. But while durian was banned for its smell, another fruit was kept out of American gardens for a much more dangerous reason. It can actually make you sick if you eat it at the wrong time. It looks bright, colorful, and inviting, but one wrong bite of this fruit could send you straight to the hospital. Ackee is the national fruit of Jamaica, celebrated in the island's most famous dish, ackee and saltfish. It was brought to the Caribbean from West Africa during the transatlantic slave trade, and over centuries, it became a beloved part of Jamaican identity. But when Americans encountered ackee, the story took a very different turn. The problem with ackee is timing. If eaten before the fruit naturally opens on its own, it contains hypoglycemia, a toxin that can cause vomiting, seizures, or even death. Because of this danger, the FDA banned the import of fresh ackee into the United States for decades. Only carefully processed, canned versions are occasionally allowed, and even those are closely monitored. For many Jamaicans living in America, the ban was heartbreaking, cutting them off from a cherished piece of their cultural heritage. Imagine growing up with a food that was tied to family, tradition, and home, only to be told that in your new country, it was considered poisonous and illegal. Ackee became more than a banned fruit. It became a symbol of cultural identity, clashing with regulation. To this day, stories of Jamaican families smuggling ackee seeds or fruit into the U.S. are whispered in immigrant communities, reminders of how far people will go to hold on to a taste of home. But while ackee was feared for its natural toxins, another banned fruit was avoided for a completely different reason: the way it clashed with America's farms and environment. They called it the queen of fruits, but in America, this royal delicacy was once treated like a dangerous outlaw. For centuries, mangosteen was prized across Southeast Asia for its sweet, tangy flavor and almost mystical reputation. Queen Victoria of England reportedly adored it, and travelers carried back tales of its unmatched taste. By the 19th century, Americans were eager to try it, but bringing mangosteen across the ocean came with hidden risks. Mangosteen wasn't banned because of poison or taste, but because it often harbored fruit flies and invasive pests. The U.S. Department of Agriculture feared that even a single contaminated shipment could devastate crops like citrus and apples. So for nearly a century, Americans could only dream of the fruit that the rest of the world raved about. It became legendary, a forbidden treasure, often described as the one flavor Americans weren't allowed to taste. It wasn't until 2007 that the ban was partially lifted, with strict import rules requiring mangosteen to be irradiated or treated before entering the country. By then, an entire generation had grown up hearing about the mythical fruit, but never seeing one in stores. For older Americans, tasting mangosteen for the first time felt less like trying a fruit, and more like fulfilling a long-delayed promise. But while mangosteen was kept out to protect American farms, another fruit was banned for a much darker reason: because it was thought to drive people insane. A grape so controversial, it was tied to one of the most infamous banned drinks in American history. During the 19th century, absinthe wasn't just a drink. It was a cultural phenomenon in Europe, tied to artists, poets, and bohemians. In America, however, absinthe was viewed with suspicion, linked to hallucinations, immorality, and even madness. The controversy bled into agriculture when certain varieties of grapes, specifically used in producing absinthe and strong European liqueurs, were deemed too dangerous to cultivate in U.S. soil. Americans already loved wine, but the government was eager to protect public morals and public health. Grapes associated with absinthe production were restricted in part to limit the spread of the drink itself, which had become a scapegoat for alcoholism. At the same time, these grapes were also viewed as agricultural threats, with fears they could harbor diseases that might devastate local vineyards. The strangest part? Absinthe grapes weren't toxic on their own. They were simply guilty by association. Entire crops were banned or destroyed, not because of what they were, but because of what they represented. And while absinthe eventually returned to American shelves in the early 2000s, the grapes themselves remain rare in American gardens, shadows of a time when fear dictated what could and couldn't be grown. But not all forbidden fruits were linked to scandalous drinks. Some were banned simply because they looked too much like trouble. Imagine eating a lemon, and it tastes as sweet as candy. That's the power of a tiny red berry America wasn't allowed to grow. Native to West Africa, miracle fruit, or Syncephalum dulcificum, contains a natural compound called miraculin. This compound binds to your taste buds and temporarily alters your sense of flavor, making sour foods taste sugary sweet. In the 1960s, American entrepreneurs saw it as a potential sugar substitute, especially during rising health concerns over processed sugar. The berry was poised to revolutionize dieting and food production. Imagine drinking unsweetened grapefruit juice that tasted like soda, or eating vinegar as if it were honey. Food companies invested in miracle fruit research, believing it could replace artificial sweeteners like saccharin and aspartame. For a moment, it looked like miracle fruit could become the next big thing in American kitchens. But then, almost overnight, the dream ended. In 1974, the FDA suddenly classified miracle fruit as an additive, effectively banning its commercial use. Rumors swirled that the sugar industry had quietly lobbied against it, fearing financial ruin if the berry replaced their products. Whether true or not, miracle fruit vanished from the mainstream, relegated to underground flavor-tripping parties and private gardens outside the U.S. While miracle fruit was silenced by politics and profits, another banned fruit met its fate because of pure, destructive danger. It's the national fruit of Jamaica, but in America, eating it could literally land you in the hospital. Ackee is a bright red fruit native to West Africa, but brought to the Caribbean in the 18th century, where it became a staple of Jamaican cuisine. Its buttery flesh, often cooked with salted cod, became a beloved national dish. But ackee has a dangerous side. When eaten unripe or improperly prepared, it contains hypoglycin, a toxin that can cause sudden illness known as Jamaican vomiting sickness. For Caribbean immigrants in the United States, ackee was more than just food. It was a connection to home. But in 1973, the FDA banned fresh ackee imports due to safety concerns, restricting its availability almost entirely. For decades, the only way Americans could taste this iconic fruit was to travel abroad. The irony is striking. In Jamaica, ackee is part of daily life, yet in America, it was treated like contraband. To this day, only canned ackee that passes FDA inspection is allowed into the country. Many Jamaican Americans recall smuggling the fruit in their luggage, risking confiscation simply to share a piece of their culture with family in the U.S. It wasn't just a fruit being banned, it was a cultural identity placed under restriction. But while ackee was outlawed for safety, another exotic fruit was banned in the U.S. for a reason that seems almost unbelievable: its unbearable smell. They call it the king of fruits in Asia, but in America, its reign was cut short by a smell so strong it could clear a room. Durian has been cherished across Southeast Asia for centuries, celebrated for its creamy, custard-like flesh and rich flavor. In Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia, it's eaten fresh, cooked into desserts, or blended into drinks. But there's one thing durian is equally famous for: its odor. Described as a mix of rotten onions, gasoline, and gym socks, its smell is so pungent that it's banned from hotels, buses, and even airplanes across Asia. When immigrants brought durian to America, curiosity quickly grew. Food adventurers and international markets embraced it, praising its unique taste despite the notorious smell. However, importing and cultivating durian faced strict restrictions. U.S. officials cited agricultural risks like invasive pests hitching rides on the fruit, alongside health concerns, and, of course, complaints about its overpowering odor. For many Asian American families, durian wasn't just food, it was comfort, memory, and identity. Yet in the United States, it became stigmatized, treated almost like forbidden contraband. The smell that reminded one group of home became, for others, a reason to keep it out entirely. Even today, fresh durian is rarely seen outside specialty markets, and growing it in American gardens is largely prohibited. What was once considered a royal delicacy elsewhere remains, in the U.S., a misunderstood outlaw. If durian was banned for its smell, the next fruit was banned for something even stranger, because it was believed to cause fevers and hallucinations. It looked harmless enough, but this shimmering fruit was once whispered about like it carried a curse. The star apple, native to the Caribbean and Central America, gets its name from the star-shaped pattern hidden in its jelly-like flesh. In local cuisines, it was a refreshing treat, eaten raw or blended into desserts. But when it reached American shores in the mid-20th century, rumors began to swirl. Folklore and misunderstanding painted it as a fruit that could cause fevers, stomach pain, and even hallucinations. In its homelands, the fruit wasn't just food, it was part of cultural identity, often shared at gatherings or sold in local markets. But in the United States, the Department of Agriculture saw risks beyond superstition. Like other tropical fruits, star apples often carried pests that could threaten American orchards. Between cultural misunderstandings and strict import rules, the fruit slipped into obscurity in the U.S., remembered only by those who grew up with it abroad. The star apple wasn't truly poisonous. The danger came from eating the bitter skin and rind, which contained irritating compounds. But by the time this was understood, the fruit had already been branded with suspicion. For Caribbean Americans, the ban meant losing a taste of home, and for curious Americans, it became another forbidden fruit they would hear about but never try. What was common in Kingston or Port of Spain became mythical in New York or Chicago. But while star apple's ban came from superstition and pests, the next fruit was restricted for a reason Americans could relate to all too well: its dangerous thorns. With its scaly skin and fierce thorns, this fruit looked more like a weapon than something you'd eat. Salak, known as snake fruit for its reddish-brown, scale-like skin, is native to Indonesia and Southeast Asia. Beneath its intimidating shell lies a sweet, crunchy flesh that tastes like a cross between apple, banana, and pineapple. In its homeland, Salak is a common snack, eaten fresh or candied. But in America, the fruit never had a chance to become popular, and not because of its taste. The fruit's sharp thorns and tough exterior made it notoriously difficult to harvest and transport. U.S. officials worried that the plants themselves could become invasive, with their thorny palms overtaking farmland and harming workers. Import restrictions, combined with agricultural fears, kept Salak largely out of American markets, despite growing international curiosity. For immigrants from Southeast Asia, Salak was more than food. It was a reminder of bustling markets and family traditions back home. Yet in the U.S., it was treated like a biohazard, rarely seen outside of tightly controlled specialty imports. Ironically, the very fruit that symbolized hospitality in villages across Indonesia was considered too dangerous to even grow in American soil. But if Salak was banned for its thorns, the next forbidden fruit was outlawed for a reason straight out of science fiction. It could reproduce without seeds. Imagine a tree covered in what looks like clusters of grapes blowing straight from the coast. Too strange to be real, and too risky for America to allow. Native to Brazil, Jaboticaba, often called the tree grape, is one of the most visually striking fruits in the world. Its dark purple berries sprout directly from the trunk, giving the appearance of a tree coated in grapes. In South America, Jaboticaba is eaten fresh, turned into jellies, and even fermented into wines. But in the United States, this fruit has long been kept under conversation. The appeal of Jaboticaba lies not just in its flavor, but in its uniqueness. Early horticulturists and plant collectors were fascinated by it, seeing it as an exotic gem that could capture American imaginations. Yet U.S. agricultural agencies saw only danger. Jaboticaba trees were believed to be potential carriers of fruit flies and plant diseases that could devastate American orchards, particularly vineyards. As a result, growing or importing them without special permits was banned. For many Brazilians who emigrated to America, Jaboticaba wasn't just fruit, it was childhood. Families would gather around the trunk, picking berries fresh off the bark. In America, though, that memory was stripped away by regulation. What was a symbol of joy and togetherness in Brazil became an unattainable curiosity in the United States, remembered only through stories and smuggled seeds that often never survived. And that's the story of so many of these banned fruits. Not just the loss of taste, but the loss of a cultural connection. Yet, each of these fruits reminds us of the fragile balance between protecting American farms and preserving flavors from around the world. As we've seen, America's history with fruit isn't just about what we grew. It's about what we were told we couldn't. From the queen of fruits kept out by quarantine laws, to the Jamaican Ackee outlawed for safety, and even a miracle berry silenced by politics. These banned fruits carry stories far larger than their size. They remind us of a time when every bite came with questions of culture, safety, and control. For some, these fruits were more than food. They were ties to home, family, and heritage. For others, they became legends, whispered about, as forbidden treasures just out of reach. And even today, many remain locked behind regulations, symbols of how fragile and complicated our food history really is. If you enjoyed this journey through America's forbidden orchards, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories of the past, the flavors, traditions, and forgotten pieces of history that shaped who we are today. Because sometimes, the foods we lost tell us just as much as the ones we still enjoy. This is the America we remember, and I'll see you in the next one.